Hello, everyone. Happy Monday, and we are back with some more Dune tonight. And it's going to be a good time because we are officially in the second third of the novel. Um, like I said, it's divided into three parts, and we are finally starting part two, which is very exciting for me. I didn't know if I'd make it this far, so I'm very happy that we have indeed made it this far. And I hope we go the whole 9 yards with this. So, I hope everybody's settled in and staying safe, and I hope everybody's ready to listen to this beginning part here. So, when we left off yesterday, Paul and Jessica had taken shelter in the desert with a little help from Duncan, Idaho, and they were figuring out where they should go after this point. And Paul, meanwhile, was experiencing some sort of cosmic awakening wherein he could see things happening in the future, in the past. Basically, he had awareness of all of time, which is pretty wild. So, let's see where that takes us. So, this is chapter 21, the beginning of part 2. When my father, the Padishah Emperor, heard of Duke Leto's death and the manner of it, he went into such a rage as we had never seen before. He blamed my mother and the compact forced on him to place a Bene Gesserit on the throne. He blamed the guild and the evil old baron. He blamed everyone in sight, not excepting even me, for he said I was a witch like all the others. And when I sought to comfort him, saying it was done according to an older law of self-preservation, to which even the most ancient rulers gave allegiance, he sneered at me and asked if I thought him a weakling. I saw then that he had been aroused to this passion not by concern over the dead duke, but what that death implied for all royalty. As I look back on it, I think there must have been some prescience in my father too, for it is certain that his line and Muad'Dib's shared common ancestry. In my father's house, by the Princess Irulan. Now Harkonnen shall kill Harkonnen, Paul whispered. He had awakened shortly before nightfall, sitting up in the sealed and darkened still tent. As he spoke, he heard the vague stirrings of his mother where she slept against the tent's opposite wall. Paul glanced at the proximity detector on the floor, studying the dials illuminated in the blackness by phosphor tubes. It should be night soon, his mother said. Why don't you lift the tent shades? Paul realized then that her breathing had been different for some time, that she had lain silent in the darkness until certain he was awake. Lifting the shades wouldn't help, he said. There's been a storm. The tent's covered by sand. I'll dig us out soon. No sign of Duncan yet? None. Paul rubbed absently at the ducal signet on his thumb, and a sudden rage against the very substance of this planet which had helped kill his father set him trembling. I heard the storm begin, Jessica said. The undemanding emptiness of her words helped restore some of his calm. His mind focused on the storm as he had seen it begin through the transparent end of their still tent. Cold dribbles of sand crossing the basin, then runnels and tails furrowing the sky. He had looked up to a rock spire, seen it change shape under the blast, becoming a low, cheddar-colored wedge. Sand funneled into their basin had shadowed the sky with dull curry, then blotted out all light as the tent was covered. Tent bows had creaked once as they accepted the pressure, then silence, broken only by the dim bellows wheezing of their sand snorkel, pumping air from the surface. Try the receiver again, Jessica said. No use, he said. He found his stillsuit's water tube in its clip at his neck, drew a warm swallow into his mouth, and he thought that here he truly began an Arakeen existence, living on reclaimed moisture from his own breath and body. It was flat and tasteless water, but it soothed his throat. Jessica heard Paul drinking, felt the slickness of her own stillsuit clinging to her body, but she refused to accept her thirst. To accept it would require awakening fully into the terrible necessities of Arrakis, where they must guard even fractional traces of moisture, hoarding the few drops in the tent's catch pockets, begrudging a breath wasted on the open air. So much easier to drift back down into sleep. But there had been a dream in this day's sleep, and she shivered at the memory of it. She had held dreaming hands beneath sand flow where a name had been written. Duke Leto Atreides. The name had blurred with the sand, and she had moved to restore it, but the first letter filled before the last was begun. The sand would not stop. Her dream became wailing, louder and louder. That ridiculous wailing. Part of her mind had realized the sound was her own voice, as a tiny child, little more than a baby. A woman not quite visible to memory was going away. My unknown mother, Jessica thought. The Bene Gesserit who bore me and gave me to the sisters, because that's what she was commanded to do. Was she glad to rid herself of a Harkonnen child? The place to hit them is in the spice, Paul said. How can he think of attack at a time like this? She asked herself. An entire planet full of spice, she said. How can you hit them there? She heard him stirring, the sound of their pack being dragged across the tent floor. It was sea power and air power on Caladan, he said. Here it's desert power. The Fremen are the key. His voice came from the vicinity of the tent sphincter. Her Bene Gesserit training sensed in his tone an unresolved bitterness toward her. All his life he has been trained to hate Harkonnens, she thought. Now he finds he is Harkonnen. Because of me. How little he knows me. I was my Duke's only woman. I accepted his life and his values, even to defying my Bene Gesserit orders. The tent's glow tab came alight under Paul's hand, filled the domed area with green radiance. Paul crouched at the sphincter, his still-suit hood adjusted for the open desert. Forehead capped, mouth filter in place, nose plugs adjusted. Only his dark eyes were visible, a narrow band of face that turned once toward her and away. Secure yourself for the open, he said, and his voice was blurred behind the filter. Sorry, something's going on with my computer at the moment. There we go. Jessica pulled the filter across her mouth, began adjusting her hood as she watched Paul break the tent seal. Sand rasped as he opened the sphincter, and a blurred fizzle of grains ran into the tent before he could immobilize it with a static compaction tool. A hole grew in the sand wall as the tool realigned the grains. He slipped out, and her ears followed his progress to the surface. What will we find out there? She wondered. Harkonnen troops and the Sardaukar, those are dangers we can expect. But what of the dangers we don't know? She thought of the compaction tool and the other strange instruments in the pack. Each of these tools suddenly stood in her mind as a sign of mysterious dangers. She then felt a hot breeze from surface sand touch her cheeks where they were exposed above the filter. Pass up the pack. It was Paul's voice, low and guarded. She moved to obey, heard the water leader John's gurgle as she shoved the pack across the floor. She peered upward, saw Paul framed against stars. Here, he said, and reached down, pulled the pack to the surface. Now she saw only the circle of stars. They were like the luminous tips of weapons aimed down at her. A shower of meteors crossed her patch of night. The meteors seemed to her like a warning, like tiger stripes, like luminous grave slats clabbering her blood, and she felt the chill of the price on their heads. Hurry up, Paul said. I want to collapse the tent. A shower of sand from the surface brushed her left hand. How much sand will the hand hold? She asked herself. Shall I help you? Paul asked. No. She swallowed in a dry throat, slipped into the hole, felt static-packed sand rasp under her hands. Paul reached down, took her arm. She stood beside him on a smooth patch of starlit desert, stared around. Sand almost brimmed their basin, leaving only a dim lip of surrounding rock. She probed the further darkness with her trained senses. Noise of small animals. Birds. A fall of dislodged sand and faint creature sounds within it. Paul collapsing their tent, recovering it up the hole. Starlight displaced just enough of the night to charge each shadow with menace. She looked at patches of blackness. Black is a blind remembering, she thought. You listen for pack sounds, for the cries of those who hunted your ancestors in a past so ancient only your most primitive selves remember. The ears see, the nostrils see. Presently, Paul stood beside her, said, Duncan told me that if he was captured, he could hold out this long. We must leave here now. He shouldered the pack, crossed to the shallow lip of the basin, climbed to a ledge that looked down on open desert. Jessica followed automatically, noting how she now lived in her son's orbit. For now is my grief heavier than the sands of the seas, she thought. This world has emptied me of all but the oldest purpose, tomorrow's life. I live now for my young Duke and the daughter yet to be. She felt the sand drag her feet as she climbed to Paul's side. He looked north across a line of rocks, studying a distant escarpment. The faraway rock profile was like an ancient battleship of the seas outlined by stars, the long swish of it lifted on an invisible wave with syllables of boomerang antennae, funnels arcing back, a pie-shaped upthrusting at the stern. An orange glare burst above the silhouette, and a line of brilliant purple cut downward through the glare. Another line of purple, and another upthrusting orange glare. It was like an ancient naval battle, remembered shell fire, and the sight had held them staring. Pillars of fire, Paul whispered. A ring of red eyes lifted over the distant rock. Lines of purple laced the sky. Jet flares and laser guns, Jessica said. The dust-reddened first moon of Arrakis lifted above the horizon to their left, and they saw a storm trail there, a ribbon of movement over the desert. It must be Harkonnen Thopters hunting us, Paul said. The way they're cutting up the desert, it's as though they were making certain they stamped out whatever's there, the way you'd stamp out a nest of insects. Or a nest of Atreides, Jessica said. We must seek cover, Paul said. We'll head south and keep to the rocks. If they caught us in the open... He turned, adjusting the pack to his shoulders. They're killing anything that moves. He took one step along the ledge, and in that instant heard the low hiss of gliding aircraft, saw the dark shapes of ornithopters above them. And that's the end of the first chapter that we're going to be reading tonight. So, here's our second one. My father once told me that respect for the truth comes close to being the basis for all morality. Something cannot emerge from nothing, he said. This is profound thinking if you understand how unstable the truth can be. From Conversations with Muad'Dib by the Princess Irulan. I've always prided myself on seeing things the way they truly are, Thufir Hawat said. That's the curse of being a mentat. You can't stop analyzing your data. The leathered old face appeared composed in the pre-dawn dimness as he spoke. His safu-stained lips were drawn into a straight fine with radial creases spreading upward. A robed man squatted silently on sand across from Hawat, apparently unmoved by the words. The two crouched beneath a rock overhang that looked down on a wide, shallow sink. Dawn was spreading over the shattered outline of cliffs across the basin, touching everything with pink. It was cold under the overhang, a dry and penetrating chill left over from the night. There had been a warm wind just before dawn, but now it was cold. Hawat could hear teeth chattering behind him among the few troopers remaining in his force. The man squatting across from Hawat was a Fremen who had come across the sink in the first light of false dawn, skittering over the sand, blending into the dunes, his movements barely discernible. The Fremen extended a finger to the sand between them, drew a figure there. It looked like a bowl with an arrow spilling out of it. There are many Harkonnen patrols, he said. He lifted his finger, pointed upward across the cliffs that Hawat and his men had descended. Hawat nodded. Many patrols, yes. But still he did not know what this Fremen wanted, and this rankled. Mentat training was supposed to give a man the power to see motives. This had been the worst night of Hawat's life. He had been at Simpo, a garrison village, buffer outpost for the former capital city, Carthage, when the reports of attack began arriving. At first he thought, it's a raid, the Harkonnens are testing. But report followed report, faster and faster. 2 legions landed at Carthage. 5 legions, 50 brigades, attacking the Duke's main base at Arrakeen. A legion at Arsunt, 2 battle groups at Splintered Rock. Then the reports became more detailed. There were Imperial Sardaukar among the attackers, possibly 2 legions of them, and it became clear that the invaders knew precisely which weight of arms to send where. Precisely superb intelligence. Hawat's shocked fury had mounted until it threatened the smooth functioning of his mentat capabilities. The size of the attack struck his mind like a physical blow. Now hiding beneath a bit of desert rock, he nodded to himself, pulled his torn and slashed tunic around him as though warding off the cold shadows. The size of the attack! He had always expected their enemy to hire an occasional lighter from the guild for probing raids. That was an ordinary enough gambit in this kind of house-to-house warfare. Lighters landed and took off on Arrakis regularly to transport the spice for House Atreides. Hawat had taken precautions against random raids by false spice lighters. For a full attack, they'd expected no more than 10 brigades. But there were more than 2,000 ships down on Arrakis at the last count. Not just lighters, but frigates, scouts, monitors, crushers, troop carriers, dump boxes. More than 100 brigades. 10 legions. The entire spice income of Arrakis for 50 years might just cover the cost of such a venture. It might. I underestimated what the Baron was willing to spend in attacking us, Hawat thought. I failed my Duke. Then there was the matter of the traitor. I will live long enough to see her strangled, he thought. I should have killed that Bene Gesserit witch when I had the chance. There was no doubt in his mind who had betrayed them. The Lady Jessica. She fitted all the facts available. Your man Gurney Halleck and part of his force are safe with our smuggler friends, the Fremen said. Good. So Gurney will get off this hell planet. We're not all gone. Hawat glanced back at the huddle of his men. He had started the night just past with 300 of his finest. Of those, an even 20 remained, and half of them were wounded. Some of them slept now, standing up, leaning against the rock, sprawled on the sand beneath the rock. Their last Thopter, the one they'd been using as a ground effect machine to carry their wounded, had given out just before dawn. They had cut it up with laser guns and hidden the pieces, then worked their way down into this hiding place at the edge of the basin. Hawat had only a rough idea of their location, some 200 kilometers southeast of Arrakeen. The main traveled ways between the Shield Wall Sietch communities were somewhere south of them. The Fremen across from Hawat threw back his hood and stillsuit cap to reveal sandy hair and beard. The hair was combed straight back from a high, thin forehead. He had the unreadable, total blue eyes of the spice diet. Beard and mustache were stained at one side of the mouth, his hair matted there by pressure of the looping catch tube from his nose plugs. The man removed his plugs, readjusted them. He rubbed at a scar beside his nose. If you cross the sink here this night, the Fremen said, you must not use shields. There is a break in the wall. He turned on his heels, pointed south. There, and it is open sand down to the Urg. Shields would attract a... He hesitated. Worm. They don't often come in here, but a shield will bring one every time. He said worm, Hawat thought. He was going to say something else. What? And what does he want of us? Hawat sighed. He could not recall ever before being this tired. It was a muscle weariness that energy pills were unable to ease. Those damnable Sardaukar. With a self-accusing bitterness, he faced the thought of the soldier fanatics and the imperial treachery they represented. His own Mentat assessment of the data told him how little chance he had to ever present evidence of this treachery before the High Council of the Landsraad, where justice might be done. Do you wish to go to the smugglers? The Fremen asked. Is it possible? The way is long. Fremen don't like to say no, Idaho had told him once. Hawat said, I can help my wounded. They are wounded. The same damned answer every time. We know they're wounded, Hawat snapped. That's not the... Peace, friend, the Fremen cautioned. What do your wounded say? Are there those among them who can see the water need of your tribe? We haven't talked about water, Hawat said. I can understand your reluctance, the Fremen said. They are your friends, your tribesmen. Do you have water? Not enough. The Fremen gestured to Hawat's tunic, the skin exposed beneath it. You were caught in Sietch without your suits. You must make a water decision, friend. Can we hire your help? The Fremen shrugged. You have no water. He glanced at the group behind Hawat. How many of your wounded would you spend? Hawat fell silent, staring at the man. He could see as a Mentat their communication was out of phase. Word sounds were not being linked up here in the normal manner. I am Thufir Hawat, he said. I can speak for my Duke. I will make promissory commitment now for your help. I wish a limited form of help, preserving my force long enough only to kill a traitor who thinks herself beyond vengeance. You wish our siding in a vendetta? The vendetta I'll handle myself. I wish to be freed of responsibility for my wounded, that I may get about it. The Fremen scowled. How can you be responsible for your wounded? They are their own responsibility. The water's an issue, Thufir Hawat. Would you have me take the decision away from you? The man put a hand to a weapon concealed beneath his robe. Hawat tensed, wondering, is there betrayal here? What do you fear? The Fremen demanded. These people and their disconcerting directness. Hawat spoke cautiously. There's a price on my head. Ah. The Fremen removed his hand from his weapon. You think we have the Byzantine corruption. You don't know us. The Harkonnens have not water enough to buy the smallest child among us. But they have the price of guild passage for more than 2,000 fighting ships, Hawat thought, and the size of that price still staggered him. We both fight Harkonnens, Hawat said. Should we not share the problems and ways of meeting the battle issue? We are sharing, the Fremen said. I have seen you fight Harkonnens. You are good. There have been times I'd have appreciated your arm beside me. Say where my arm may help you, Hawat said. Who knows? The Fremen asked. There are Harkonnen forces everywhere, but you still have not made the water decision or put it to your wounded. I must be cautious, Hawat told himself. There's a thing here that's not understood. He said, Will you show me your way, the Arakeen way? Stranger thinking, the Fremen said, and there was a sneer in his tone. He pointed to the northwest, across the cliff top. We watched you come across the sand last night. He lowered his arm. You keep your force on the slip face of the dunes. Bad. You have no steel suits, no water. You will not last long. The ways of Arrakis don't come easily, Hawat said. Truth, but we've killed Harkonnens. What do you do with your own wounded? Hawat demanded. Does a man not know when he is worth saving? The Fremen asked. Your wounded know you have no water. He tilted his head, looking sideways up at Hawat. This is clearly a time for water decision. Both wounded and unwounded must look to the tribe's future. The tribe's future? Hawat thought. The tribe of Atreides, there's sense in that. He forced himself to the question he had been avoiding. Have you word of my duke or his son? Unreadable blue eyes stared upward into Hawat's. Word. Their fate! Hawat snapped. Fate is the same for everyone, the Fremen said. Your duke, it is said, has met his fate. As to the Lisan al-Gaib, his son, that is in Leet's hands. Leet has not said. I knew the answer without asking, Hawat thought. He glanced back to his men. They were all awake now. They had heard. They were staring out across the sand, the realization in their expressions. There was no returning to Caladan for them, and now Arrakis was lost. Hawat turned back to the Fremen. Have you heard of Duncan Idaho? He was in the great house when the shield went down, the Fremen said. This I've heard. No more. She dropped the shield and let in the Harkonnens, he thought. I was the one who sat with my back to a door. How could she do this when it meant turning also against her own son? But who knows how a Bene Gesserit witch thinks, if you can call it thinking. Hawat tried to swallow in a dry throat. When will you hear about the boy? We know little of what happens in Arakeen, the Fremen said. He shrugged. Who knows? You have ways of finding out. Perhaps. The Fremen rubbed at the scar beside his nose. Tell me, Thufir Hawat, do you have knowledge of the big weapons the Harkonnens used? The artillery, Hawat thought bitterly. Who could have guessed they'd use artillery in this day of shields? You refer to the artillery they used to trap our people in the caves, he said. I've theoretical knowledge of such explosive weapons. Any man who retreats into a cave which has only one opening deserves to die, the Fremen said. Why do you ask about these weapons? Leet wishes it. Is that what he wants from us? Hawat wondered. He said, Did you come here seeking information about the big guns? Leet wished to see one of the weapons for himself. Then you should just go take one, Hawat sneered. Yes, the Fremen said. We took one. We have it hidden where Stilgar can study it for Leet, and where Leet can see it for himself if he wishes. But I doubt he'll want to. The weapon is not a very good one. Poor design for Arrakis." "You took one?" Hawat asked. "It was a good fight," the Fremen said. "We lost only 2 men and spilled the water from more than 100 of theirs." There was Sardaukar at every gun, Hawat thought. This desert madman speaks casually of losing only 2 men against Sardaukar. "We would not have lost the 2 except for those others fighting beside the Harkonnens," the Fremen said. "Some of those are good fighters." One of Hawat's men limped forward, looking down at the squatting Fremen. "Are you talking about Sardaukar?" "He's talking about Sardaukar," Hawat said. "Sardaukar," the Fremen said, and there appeared to be glee in his voice. "Ah, so that's what they are. This was a good night indeed. Sardaukar. Which legion, do you know?" "We don't know," Hawat said. "Sardaukar," the Fremen mused. "Yet they wear Harkonnen clothing. Is that not strange?" "The Emperor does not wish it known he fights against a great house," Hawat said. "But you know they are Sardaukar." "Who am I?" Hawat asked bitterly. "You are Thufir Hawat," the man said matter-of-factly. "Well, we would have learned it in time. We've sent 3 of them captive to be questioned by Leet's men." Hawat's aide spoke slowly, disbelief in every word. "You captured Sardaukar?" "Only 3 of them," the Fremen said. "They fought well." "If only we'd had the time to link up with these Fremen," Hawat thought. It was a sour lament in his mind. "If only we could have trained them and armed them. Great Mother, what a fighting force we'd have had." "Perhaps you delay because of worry over the Lisan al-Gaib," the Fremen said. "If he is truly the Lisan al-Gaib, harm cannot touch him. Do not spend thoughts on a matter which has not been proved." "I serve the Lisan al-Gaib," Hawat said. "His welfare is my concern. I've pledged myself to this." "You are pledged to his water." Hawat glanced to his aide, who was still staring at the Fremen, returned his attention to the squatting figure. "To his water, yes." "You wish to return to Arrakeen, to the place of his water?" Yes, to the place of his water." "Why did you not say at first it was a water matter?" The Fremen stood up, seated his nose plugs firmly. Hawat motioned with his head for his aide to return to the others. With a tired shrug, the man obeyed. Hawat heard a low-voiced conversation arise among the men. The Fremen said, "There is always a way to water." Behind Hawat, a man cursed. Hawat's aide called, "Thufir! Arki just died!" The Fremen put a fist to his ear. "The bond of water. It's a sign." He stared at Hawat. "We have a place nearby for accepting the water. Shall I call my men?" The aide returned to Hawat's side, said, "Thufir, a couple of the men left wives in Arrakeen. Well, you know how it is at a time like this." The Fremen still held his fist to his ear. "Is it the bond of water, Thufir Hawat?" he demanded. Hawat's mind was racing. He sensed now the direction of the Fremen's words, but feared the reaction of the tired men under the rock overhang when they understood it. "The bond of water," Hawat said. "Let our tribes be joined," the Fremen said, and he lowered his fist. As though that were the signal, 4 men slid and dropped down from the rocks above them. They darted back under the overhang, rolled the dead man in a loose robe, lifted him, and began running with him along the cliff wall to the right. Spurts of dust lifted around their running feet. It was over before Hawat's tired men could gather their wits. The group with the body hanging like a sack in its enfolding robe was gone around a turn in the cliff. One of Hawat's men shouted, "Where are they going with Arki? He was—" "They're taking him to bury him," Hawat said. "Fremen don't bury their dead," the man barked. "Don't you try any tricks on us, Thufir. We know what they do. Arki was one of—" "Paradise was sure for a man who died in the service of Lisan al-Gaib," the Fremen said. "If it is the Lisan al-Gaib you serve, as you have said it, why raise mourning cries? The memory of one who died in this fashion will live as long as the memory of man endures." But Hawat's men advanced, angry looks on their faces. One had captured a laser gun. He started to draw it. "Stop right where you are!" Hawat barked. He fought down the sick fatigue that gripped his muscles. "These people respect our dead. Customs differ, but the meaning's the same. They're going to render Arky down for his water," the man with the laser gun snarled. "Is it that your men wish to attend the ceremony?" the Fremen asked. He doesn't even see the problem, Hawat thought. The naivete of the Fremen was frightening. "They're concerned for a respected comrade," Hawat said. "We will treat your comrade with the same reverence we treat our own," the Fremen said. "This is the bond of water. We know the rights. A man's flesh is his own. The water belongs to the tribe." Hawat spoke quickly as the man with the laser gun advanced another step. "Will you now help our wounded?" "One does not question the bond," the Fremen said. "We will do for you what a tribe does for its own. First, we must get all of you suited and see to the necessities." The man with the laser gun hesitated. Hawat's aide said, "Are we buying help with Arky's water?" "Not buying," Hawat said. "We've joined these people." "Customs differ," one of his men muttered. Hawat began to relax. "And they'll help us get to Arrakeen." "We will kill Harkonnens," the Fremen said. He grinned. "And Sardaukar." He stepped backward, cupped his hands beside his ears, and tipped his head back, listening. Presently he lowered his hands, said, "An aircraft comes. Conceal yourselves beneath the rock and remain motionless." At a gesture from Hawat, his men obeyed. The Fremen took Hawat's arm, pressed him back with the others. "We will fight in the time of fighting," the man said. He reached beneath his robes, brought out a small cage, lifted a creature from it. Hawat recognized a tiny bat. The bat turned its head, and Hawat saw its blue within blue eyes. The Fremen stroked the bat, soothing it, crooning to it. He bent over the animal's head, allowed a drop of saliva to fall from his tongue to the bat's upturned mouth. The bat stretched its wings, but remained on the Fremen's opened hand. The man took a tiny tube, held it beside the bat's head, and chattered into the tube. Then, lifting the creature high, he threw it upward. The bat swooped away beside the cliff and was lost to sight. The Fremen folded the cage, thrust it beneath his robe. Again he bent his head, listening. "They quarter the high country," he said. "One wonders who they seek up there." "It's known that we retreated in this direction," Hawat said. "One should never presume one is the sole object of a hunt," the Fremen said. "Watch the other side of the basin. You will see a thing." Time passed. Some of Hawat's men stirred, whispering. "Remain silent as frightened animals," the Fremen hissed. Hawat discerned movement near the opposite cliff, flitting blurs of tan on tan. "My little friend carried his message," the Fremen said. "He is a good messenger, day or night. I'll be unhappy to lose that one." The movement across the sink faded away. On the entire 4 to 5 kilometer expanse of sand, nothing remained but the growing pressure of the day's heat, blurred columns of rising air. "Be most silent now," the Fremen whispered. A file of plodding figures emerged from a break in the opposite cliff, headed directly across the sink. To Hawat they appeared to be Fremen, but a curiously inept band. He counted 6 men making heavy going of it over the dunes. A thwack-thwack of ornithopter wings sounded high to the right, behind Hawat's group. The craft came over the cliff wall above them, and a Atreides thopter with Harkonnen battle colors splashed on it. The thopter swooped toward the men crossing the sink. The group there stopped on a dune crest, waved. The thopter circled once over them in a tight curve, came back for a dust-shrouded landing in front of the Fremen. 5 men swarmed from the thopter, and Hawat saw the dust-repellent shimmering of shields, and in their motions the hard competence of Sardaukar. "Aye, they use their stupid shields," the Fremen beside Hawat hissed. He glanced toward the open south wall of the sink. "They are Sardaukar," Hawat whispered. "Good." The Sardaukar approached the waiting group of Fremen in an enclosing half-circle. Sun glinted on blades held ready. The Fremen stood in a compact group, apparently indifferent. Abruptly, the sand around the 2 groups sprouted Fremen. They were at the ornithopter, then in it. Where the 2 groups had met at the dune crest, a dust cloud partly obscured violent motion. Presently, dust settled. Only Fremen remained standing. "They left only 3 men in their thopter," the Fremen beside Hawat said. "That was fortunate. I don't believe we had to damage the craft in taking it." Behind Hawat, one of his men whispered, "Those were Sardaukar!" "Did you notice how well they fought?" the Fremen asked. Hawat took a deep breath. He smelled the burned dust around him, felt the heat, the dryness. In a voice to match that dryness, he said, "Yes, they fought well indeed." The captured thopter took off with a lurching flap of wings, angled upward to the south in a steep wing-tucked climb. "So these Fremen can handle thopters too," Hawat thought. On the distant dune, a Fremen waved a square of green cloth. Once. Twice. "More come," the Fremen beside Hawat barked. "Be ready. I'd hoped to have us away without more inconvenience." Inconvenience? Hawat thought. He saw 2 more thopters swooping from high in the west onto an area of sand suddenly devoid of visible Fremen. Only 8 splotches of blue, the bodies of the Sardaukar in Harkonnen uniforms, remained at the scene of violence. Another thopter glided in over the cliff wall above Hawat. He drew in a sharp breath as he saw it. A big troop carrier. It flew with the slow spread-wing heaviness of a full load, like a giant bird coming to its nest. In the distance, the purple finger of a lasgun beam flicked from one of the diving thopters. It laced across the sand, raising a sharp trail of dust. "The cowards!" the Fremen beside Hawat rasped. The troop carrier settled toward the patch of blue-clad bodies. Its wings crept out to full reach, began the cupping action of a quick stop. Hawat's attention was caught by a flash of sun on metal to the south, a thopter plummeting there in a power dive, wings folded flat against its sides, its jets a golden flare against the dark silver-gray of the sky. It plunged like an arrow toward the troop carrier, which was unshielded because of the lasgun activity around it. Straight into the carrier the diving thopter plunged. A flaming roar shook the basin. Rocks tumbled from the cliff walls all around. A geyser of red-orange shot skyward from the sand where the carrier and its companion thopters had been. Everything there caught in the flame. "It was the Fremen who took off in that captured thopter," Hawat thought. "He deliberately sacrificed himself to get that carrier. Great Mother, what are these Fremen?" "A reasonable exchange," said the Fremen beside Hawat. "There must have been 300 men in that carrier. Now we must see to their water, and make plans to get another aircraft." He started to step out of their rock-shadowed concealment. A rain of blue uniforms came over the cliff wall in front of him, failing in low suspensor slowness. In the flashing instant, Hawat had time to see that they were Sardaukar, hard faces set in battle frenzy, that they were unshielded, and each carried a knife in one hand, a stunner in the other. A thrown knife caught Hawat's Fremen companion in the throat, hurling him backward, twisting face down. Hawat had only time to draw his own knife before a blackness of a stunner projectile felled him. And there we go. That's our section for tonight. And we shall see what happens next time. In the meantime, I hope that everybody's staying safe, staying inside, and just doing the best they can. It's important, and we're all doing what we can out here. So, I will be seeing everyone tomorrow, and have a good night. Bye-bye.